Hey guys, it's your girl Dianita and welcome back to Barbados Matters. So how'd you end up in 5 days quarantine in Barbados when you're fully vaccinated and you had 2 negative COVID-19 test results? Well, check out this video to find out how. Welcome to Barbados Matters, where we check out the sights and discuss the issues. Barbados is not just known for sun and sand, it's also rich in its history. So in this video, I thought I would show you this wonderful parish church, which is in the easterly parish of St. John. Now this site has been marked as a building of historic and architectural interest by the Barbados National Trust. So if you're like me and love to look at old buildings and ponder about the people of old and events that would have occurred around the island many, many years ago, then the St. John's Parish Church is a must-see for you. And just look at the beautiful altar and stained glass windows. And I just love to walk around the churchyard and soak up the history and think about who the persons were that are buried here. What's their story? Of particular interest is the final resting place of our former Prime Minister, the Honourable David Thompson QC, who died in 2010. He was in the political arena for many years and having finally reached the pinnacle of his political career, died in state after only 2 years as Prime Minister. The St. John's Parish Church is also known for the sundial in the churchyard. You can actually tell the time by looking at where the shadow falls on the dial. And lastly, check out the wonderful view from the church. Beautiful Barbados as always.
Okay, so good afternoon. I want to welcome Brian Walters, who was recently here in Barbados. So I'm going to talk to you about, your process of getting here first of all, and then what happened once you got here. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to speak to you. By way of background, my family and I come to Barbados every year. We started doing that as far back as 1999, and essentially, it's a guy's cricket trip. The trip this year was a little bit different, obviously, because a couple of weeks before we came down, intending to attend the cricket matches, the protocols were tightened. And so there were no fans allowed inside the stadium. And so we figured we'd just make the best of it. Obviously, the protocols would involve all of us, meaning me, my brother, and my 2 sons, being fully vaccinated. We've been fully vaccinated now for several months. And then obviously when you arrive in Barbados, show a negative test, or another negative test that's taken at the airport. And then assuming all of that goes fine, then you're free to roam the island. At least that's what we thought we were going to be able to do. We went through all of that protocol, and we went through the process of getting the green band on our wrists, right? And
the green band meant what?
Green band essentially means that when you, after you've received the results of the test that you take at the airport, assuming it's negative because there's no concerns up until that point, then essentially you're free to be all around the island without restrictions. And so we're waiting for the results of the test that we took in the airport. We actually got the results of that test, and they all, of course, came back negative. And so at this point, we're still in the quarantine hotel room, but we're starting to plan on what the next day was going to look like.
Right.
And unfortunately, about an hour, 30 minutes to an hour later, there was a knock on the door from the Ministry of Health. And the word was given to us that someone who was on the plane and seated close to one of my sons, I think within 2 rows of him, tested positive for the virus. At that point, all bets were off. We had the green bands cut off of our wrists. We had the red band, which essentially means you are not free to move around the island. And then in addition to that, there was a tracking bracelet that they would put on that essentially enforced the edict from the red band. So the trip turned from elation and joy to absolute horror in the space of a few minutes.
So because of that, you then had to go into quarantine For how long?
There was some confusion at first because, if you get the information, it suggested that quarantine would have only been for 3 days, because since we came in with negative tests and were fully vaccinated, we only needed to show for 3 days. But after the individuals from the Ministry of Health came by, they mentioned that quarantine was going to be for 5 days. And so there was that initial confusion. I sought to clarify that the next morning with a call to the Ministry of Health. And it eventually was determined that despite all my protestations, it was going to be a 5-day quarantine.
And you were going to be vacationing here for how long?
For 7 days. So one of the negative aspects of life in the U.S. is that people work here more than they do anywhere else in the world.
Vacations, correct.
So there's no such thing as a 3-week vacation. Realizing that the first 5 of those days were going to be spent in quarantine was, let's say, less than optimal.
And you would have been in a room with your sons?
It was a relatively small room, I guess. One king bed and a pull-out bed.
Because you were just imagining being there for the one night.
Overnight.
So you're
literally, I only
right.
booked one night. And in fact, I told my sons, hey, look, the room might be kind of tight, but we're only here for one night. And then after that, we have a beach house reserved. We'll be
right. I was just going to ask you, where were you going on to?
A good friend of ours has a beach house, and she's gracious enough to let us have it at a really, really reasonable price every time we come down. So great spot, right on the beach, and we were already mentally there. We just had to get through that night first at the hotel. And as it turns out, it was a little bit different.
Yeah. So how are your boys? How did they react to it?
So my oldest son, Kyle, is 24. That was his first trip to Barbados. He'd never been. Wow. And I mentioned that we typically go for a cricket trip.
I actually didn't know that Americans even played cricket, so that's news to me.
It's the biggest secret in America, but cricket is actually
We've all learned something here today.
Exactly. Jaden he's 15 now. He turned 15 on Saturday, the day that we arrived back home. He's been on the tour a few times before his fourth arrival, but we were especially looking forward to having Kyle experience the island for the first time. So needless to say, there was a tremendous disappointment on both their parts, and particularly on my part, because I was more so wanting to have him experience the entire island. And in our mind, the fact that we could not attend cricket was sort of a blessing in disguise, because if you're at cricket, you're there all day for 5 days.
Absolutely, right.
This was actually an opportunity to truly experience the island the way that we wanted to. And to know that he had the opportunity to do that and then be confined to a hotel room was pretty demoralizing for both of us, for all three of us.
Yeah. So how did you deal with it? What did you do? For the 24 hours a day for 5 days, what did you do?
We drank heavily.
Barbados rum.
I have to say this unequivocally. The people at Coconut Court Hotel, which is the hotel that we're staying at, they were overly gracious, almost to a fault.
Wonderful.
They completely empathized with the situation that we were in. Obviously, from their perspective, as the host entity, they could not allow us any movement, and that's not their fault. But they did everything that they could in order to make sure that we were comfortable. And in fact, I mentioned that we were in that one room. After a couple of days, they opened up the room next to us and allowed us to go back and forth via the balcony. So they gave us a little bit more room and a little bit more, the opportunity to move around a little bit.
Right.
And then one thing that I really did not expect, again, I told our story on the travel advisor page, the goodness of people in Barbados shone through. When I tell you that there are people who were showing up to the hotel, bringing food, bringing drinks, and bringing drinks, and there was no shortage of gifts that just let people say, we're thinking about you. This has to be a really tough situation.
Absolutely.
Everything about us wants to be there with you, but if we can't be there with you, there's something to help make you feel better. I mentioned that Jaden, my youngest son, turned 15 on Saturday. And so this trip was supposed to have been sort of a birthday celebration for him also. Well, people were delivering birthday cakes to the room. They were delivering meals specifically for him. Uh, the, it became such an absolutely amazing thing that I have a hard time even putting it into words what it meant to us.
Yeah.
So what started out being a really, really difficult time ended up being a lesson that was taught to us about the goodness of people. And look, I would never ever want to have this happen again,
Right.
but the fact that it happened allowed us to see a different element of Barbados that I'd never seen. I'd seen it in different places before, but to see how overwhelming it was is something that was really, really enjoyable and really satisfying to be able to see.
That's what stuck out for me, was seeing the empathy that everybody had. Just imagine, you've come out here, you've been fully vaccinated, you're negative, but through no fault of your own, you've ended up having to spend 5 days out of 7 in quarantine. And I think, that shone through on the Facebook page. And I could see, the person's offering, do you need anything? Let us know. That was really, really good to see. And I think for me, it was also seeing your spirit. You were sending videos. That I think was what shone through for everybody else, because often you're hearing all the complaints. There would have been questions like, well, okay, we're fully vaccinated. Why do we have to quarantine and so long? And but you kind of accepted the fate, so to speak. And from what I saw, made the most of it.
Everybody knows the serenity prayer, accepting the things that we can't change. It was probably around day 2 that I realized I was not going to be able to change anything.
Yeah.
And so the choice at that point is either to stew and be angry, and show my boys how angry I was, or to anticipate what day 5 would look like when we got out of quarantine, and then make the best of the time in between, the present time and the time that we're to get out of quarantine. And, my boys and I are very close. We've always been close. But the fact that we were able to spend that much time in the same physical space for as long as we did, playing stupid games, taking pictures. I'm a pretty avid photographer, so we're taking pictures off the balcony. Just the things that we're able to do to entertain ourselves. That sort of helped us to learn maybe slightly a different aspect to the relationship that we had. The fact that we were able to spend that much time together and sort of learn each other and learn a little bit about each other as we see ourselves in a difficult situation.
Absolutely.
That was also very, very beneficial, and I truly appreciated that opportunity.
So what did you get to do on release? Did you manage to get around the island? Did you manage to cram everything in those last, was it 2 days that you had left?
It was about a day and a half, and we did about 10 days worth of activities in that day. One thing that we always do when we're there is go on the cool run in catamaran. And so once we got the all clear, we went on the boat, had as much fun as we usually have. In fact, twice as much fun as we usually have on that tour. And then came off, and then another absolutely wonderful lady, Marcel, the owner of Crave Restaurant in the Gap, was kind enough to take us to dinner that Thursday evening, and then packed a few more activities in Friday morning, and then we flew out Friday afternoon.
Okay. So having gone through all of this, in your opinion, how do you think that Barbados has been dealing with the COVID pandemic?
This is a point that I made multiple times. Despite the fact that we had what happened to us happen to us, there is no doubt in my mind that the country of Barbados is dealing with this pandemic with the severity and the seriousness that it demands. If you extrapolate based on the population of Barbados to the population of the US, that would suggest that if the US had dealt with it in exactly the same way that Barbados has, that we would have only had around 63,000 deaths. The number of deaths in the US through yesterday was around 610,000. Literally almost 10 times as many people have died in this country as have died in Barbados, adjusting for population size And I think that is a direct reflection of how seriously the country has taken it. But if you look at it globally, there is no doubt that how seriously Barbados has taken the virus is a direct reflection of how they understand the impact that it could potentially have on the country. And I applaud the government completely for that, because the results speak for themselves.
So do you have plans to come back anytime soon?
I mentioned we're there for cricket every year, right? There may be only one other person in this world who is a bigger cricket fan than me, and it's my father, who is 83 years old and lives by himself in Houston. My mother died 6 years ago. And that Barbados trip is the highlight of his year every year. Thankfully, he didn't want to come this time. Thankfully, he wasn't in the middle of all of this, because I would have had to deal with it. But to the best of our knowledge, England is playing the West Indies in a test match next spring, and we will be there, God willing, with bells on.
Okay, no wonderful, wonderful. Well, I want to thank you for joining me. As I said, you know, your spirit, your son's spirits shone through when I saw you on the Facebook page. Not only myself, but I could see all the comments where everybody just saw you as somebody that, through a situation of no fault of your own, ended up locked down for 5 days out of 7-day trip. But I want to just thank you for coming to Barbados, first of all, again, and also just accepting the situation for what it is, making the most out of it with your sons. The attitude, as I said, just shines through.
A number of people who have had the opportunity to interact with through this entire process, you and they have all been just absolutely wonderful, and I truly appreciate it. It becomes the Barbados that I've always known it was, and seeing that emphasized and seeing that sort of epitomized is something that's really pleasing to me. So thank you very much.
And on behalf of Barbados Matters, thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
So there you have it, guys. That's how you end up in 5 days quarantine in Barbados when you're fully vaccinated and had 2 negative COVID-19 test results. And despite Brian's experience, he had nothing but praise for Barbados's protocols. So if you've not already watched my previous video on traveling to Barbados during the COVID-19 pandemic, where one of the visitors interviewed ended up in the isolation unit in Barbados due to testing positive for COVID-19 on arrival, then you can check it out. I highlighted then, and I'll emphasize again now, that if you're planning to travel to Barbados during these times, then it's important that you come prepared financially, but emotionally as well, for any eventuality. So my advice is plan for the worst, but you can expect the best vacation. But also understand that Barbados is trying its hardest to keep the country safe for citizens as well as visitors, so that we can all enjoy this beautiful island. So thanks for watching this video, guys, and don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and leave your comments below.